Hello, I'm going to be recording this talk for the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society. The talk is going to be about Suiseki and bonsai with a focus on a specific meeting, the Taikon 10. The Taikon 10 is also known as the Grand View. I was able to attend the exhibition in 2019, and when the show is just about to open, they have several dignitaries that cut a ribbon and then allow people into the convention center. If you look very closely, you'll see Bill Valvanis there as one of the dignitaries who will cut the ribbon here in a few minutes. Before we go to the show, I just want to say that the show is always held in Kyoto in November. That is also the time of the year when the maple leaves are at their height, and there are many, many people visiting Kyoto in order to see the red maple trees that time of year. And it's a very, very beautiful time of year to visit Kyoto. When you first walk in, one of the first things you see is a large tree that in this case is a Shimpaku that won the 2019 Prime Minister's Prize. This particular tree came from the bonsai gardens of Suzuki. His gardens are in Obuse in Nagano, and that's very near to where we were living in Japan. And this particular tree was styled by Matt Reel a few years ago. It's a very large tree, probably 4 feet tall. Maybe much larger than you might imagine just looking at the photograph. The other thing you notice at Taikon 10 right off is that there is, in the first displays, a lot of historical bonsai, a lot of historical stones, a lot of historical pots, and other things associated with bonsai. This particular black pine is over 300 years old. It was owned by a decorated Japanese general, and you have a photograph there of the general who owned it. It was sold in 2019 for $750,000. And again, a significant part of Taikon 10 honors historic trees. Here is a stone, a flower stone. In this case, it's a chrysanthemum flower stone that was owned by a former Prime Minister of Japan. So just like with the trees, stones that have a long history are more highly valued, and they are honored at Taikon 10 with these types of displays. And we're going to see a few of these. Again, here's a close-up of this chrysanthemum stone. You can see the crystal structures that make the flowers of these stones. These come from the Nio Valley in Gifu in Japan. And in this particular case, this is a natural stone. It hasn't been polished. This is simply the crystalline structure as the stone was found. Most of the flower stones we see, most of the chrysanthemum stones we see here in the United States are actually polished stones. But this is an unpolished stone. Here is a part of the historic display when you go into Taikon 10. You see 2 bonsais. The one on the right is the black pine I showed you a few minutes ago. Here in the middle are all sorts of historic stones and pots and what are known as suibans, that are shown as historic objects as part of Taikon 10. Here in particular is a small stone from the Meiji period, and it was owned by a number of people of importance in Japan. There was a Prince Taruhito that owned it, also another Prince Kuniyoshi that owned it, a minister of the interior of Japan, a high priest of an important temple in Japan, and a literati painter as well. This is one of the best documented stones in Japan. It's actually quite small. It would fit in the palm of your hand, perhaps 5 inches across, but it has an album with it that documents the various owners. And just to put this in perspective and to start to give you a feel for viewing stones, just imagine that this stone was Long's Peak, and that this area in the middle, this lake, if you will, was Chasm Lake. And in Japan, it's very common when people see Suiseki to say, oh, it reminds me of such and such a place. And the stones are often named after a specific place. But rather than thinking about this as a mountain in Japan, again, imagine that this is Long's Peak. You can actually climb around up the side and go through the keyhole and climb to the top of Long's Peak. This is another important historic stone from Japan, Agoromo. It's named after the main character in a Knoll play by the same name, and it's considered to be one of the premier chrysanthemum figure stones in Japan. In this case, we see a very different type of figure stone. We can see a very different type of chrysanthemum stone. You can see the small chrysanthemum patterns. And in this particular stone, they describe this as the character wearing a robe, and the flowers are the flower patterns on the robe of the character. Again, as a historical stone, these are extremely valuable objects and generally are only owned by either individuals who are very wealthy or they are owned by temples in Japan. So you will often read that there are very strict rules about display associated with the Suiseki viewing stones and bonsai. There's a right way and a wrong way. But in the same conversation, people tell you, yes, there are very strict rules, but the rules can be very different in different parts of in Japan and very different in different clubs. So there are the Tokyo rules, if you will, but there are other schools, and depending on what school you're from, you may do something very different. Having said that, Taikon 10 is certainly more expressive than many other exhibitions you'll see in Japan, and we'll see some examples of that as we go forward. In fact, here's an example from a previous Taikon 10. I believe this was 2018. This was the tree that won the Prime Minister's Prize. Just looking, I believe that is a white pine. And there are several things that are unusual about this display. One is the stone itself, which is not a Japanese stone. That is almost certainly a Chinese stone, perhaps a Lingbi stone. And also the fact that it is being shown with ceramics. The scroll in the middle, perhaps more or less traditional, but a couple of things about this display that are very different than what you would normally expect to see. But it also gives you a very strong sense that at Taikon 10, you can show stones with trees, and in fact, the stones can be very powerful part of the display. Here's also a display at Taikon 10 from a year earlier, and I pulled this one. It's the only other photograph I'll show you from a previous Taikon 10. I pulled this one because here you see the bonsai, but in this particular display, there are more stones than there are trees. And what we'll find is that these kinds of displays are actually associated with specific individuals. And I'll show you some examples of that. So this is an example of a display from Taikon 10 in 2019. This was called the Tiachu exhibit. And you can see that there is what looks like probably a plum tree would be my guess, and also a bonsai at the other end. But between the two bonsai, there are 4 stones, and there are also 3 very large scrolls. So this would be associated with one individual. These are his trees or her trees, and these are the stones that belong to him or her. I'll show you another. Here's another display, the Honda exhibit, and here we see 2 bonsai, again, flanking on either side. In this case, we have 3 stones in the middle, and then we have 3 scrolls. But in this case, the scrolls are a little bit different. They represent deities out of Zen or the Buddhist traditions. And then the 3 stones. Here's the same exhibit seen from another point of view. And again, this is associated with one individual who put together all of these things as part of a single display at Taikon 10. In this particular case, at least 2 of the stones I recognized immediately, these are very famous stones. This is a Kurama Ishii. It's been passed down through famous shogun families and families that are also associated with the ruling families of Japan for multiple generations. And it's a fairly large stone, perhaps 2 feet in width. I'll give you a little perspective here, but it's just an amazing stone. And here's a picture of me in Japan at the exhibit looking at that stone. Okay. Here's another stone in that same exhibit. This is a Yazi stone. The sudachi actually refers to the rough, sort of porous texture of the stone, and the maguro refers to the color of the stone, and Ishii just means stone. So this is a Yazi stone. Again, it's a very well-known stone. It's a very stylized mountain form. And the last stone is on a daisa. It's an unusual daisa because the stone is kind of floating on top of the daisa that creates a cloud-like impression, which is an idea associated with this particular stone. This particular stone is in a ceramic suiban filled with sand, and so it's a very different type of display, but you will certainly see stones on wooden bases and stones in either ceramic or in bronze trays filled with sand. So these are both traditional forms of display. Just to show you the quality of the trees that you see at Taikon 10, there are just lots of amazing bonsai. And one of the things that's really enjoyable about Taikon 10 is that it's less crowded and more relaxed than Kokufu. It's actually in a very large convention center, and about half of the convention center is given over to displaying the trees and the stones, the formal display. And about half of the convention center is given over to the sales area. And there's simply a door between the exhibition and the sales area. And so unlike at Kokufu, where you go in and you walk through the display, when I was there, and there's so many people that you sort of have to keep moving, and you can't sort of just stop and hang out. But at Taikon 10, it's very different. There's lots of space, and people just go there and they hang out all day long. And so that's actually one of the things that's very cool about Taikon 10. It's more like going to one of the Rocky Mountain bonsai shows, because you go and you just stay there all day and you talk to people all day long. There's the space to do that. Here's another tree that was exhibited at Taikon 10. I picked this particular photograph because I thought that the calligraphy, the kanji that is on the scroll is quite striking and goes very nicely with the tree. And here you see a bronze figure instead of a stone shown as an accent, or instead of an accent. Here's another tree from Taikon 10. I am showing this tree for 2 reasons. One, if you look very closely, this tree was made by splitting the top of the tree. So I'm going to use my pointer here. You can see that this has been split here. There's some other splits in here. And so what happened was they took this tree and just tore it in half to create the multiple branches. The other reason I thought it would be nice to show this tree is the pot actually looks like a little table, as if the tree is planted into a table. It actually has this flat surface that creates part of the display and creates a very different look in terms of how this tree displays. The roots obviously go on down into the pot, but it almost looks like it's floating on top of this tabletop surface. Here is another tree, again, a semi-cascade white pine in a super deep pot. That pot is probably, I'm going to say about 14, 16 inches deep, maybe even 18 inches deep. And then shown with a Sajikawa Stone. And again, there's a scroll here with a moon as part of the scroll. And here is that Sajikawa Stone. I've shown you the kanji across the top. I'll talk a little bit about that later. This is also a well-known stone. It's also would be considered to be a figure stone. You know, you have to ask yourself, what do I see? But you could easily see a robed figure in this particular stone. Yeah, go ahead and think about that for a little bit. Okay. Again, a tree displayed with a stone. This was very common at Taikon 10, as well as a scroll. So you do see accent plants, but you're just as likely, or perhaps even more likely, to see a stone displayed with a tree. I thought in this particular case, what was striking is that the tree is very straight, then it gets kind of crooked toward the top, but then the foliage on this tree hangs almost like a cascade from the top. So that's sort of an amazing design that I thought was very striking. Just a couple of guys hanging out at Taikon 10. You might recognize Kimura and Moramai. Oops, went the wrong way. Here's some other people hanging out at Taikon 10. There were these ladies who are geisha in training called makos, and the gentleman here and his wife is a Filipino collector who shows up at just about every major show in Japan that you can mention. So I'm going to show you a few classic stones, just so you get a feel for stones. If you haven't been looking at a lot of stones, then this is just, think of it as an introduction to some classics. This is a jaspery stone with red tones in it that I saw at the Omiya Bonsai Museum. It's an Ibigawa, and again, I've shown you the kanji here at the top for Ibigawa. Just a really striking landscape or mountain stone, the stone here, and then the flanking area in the stone. It's shown in, again, a bronze doban with sand. And this was from a pre-World War II collection that was lost for many years and rediscovered, they said recently. I don't know whether recently is 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but it's now showing up in the Omiya Bonsai Museum. This is an amazing waterfall stone. In this case, the waterfall is quite subtle in the sense that it seems to be coming out of the side of the cliff and then flowing down the face. I just think that's probably the nicest waterfall stone I've ever seen. This is a Setagawa stone. The Setagawa stones come from near Kyoto. There are different types of Setagawa stones. These stones that I'm showing you right now tend to be black, and they tend to have rather smooth landscapes. So they're sort of abstract, idealized mountains. The Setagawa kanji has this ta in it, which is a rice paddy. So it's one of the easiest names to learn. The gawa, which is the 3 strokes here, means river. And so this is se-ta-gawa. And you'll see gawa showing up all the time, but you can learn seta very easily because of the ta. Here's another Setagawa, but this is a Setagawa Tora Ishii, a tiger stone. And again, this is a very famous stone in Japan. It's quite large. It was in the Nippon Suiseki Association show in 2014. And it's considered a tiger stone again because of the white and darker banding in the stone. This is a Kamagawa stone. The Kamagawa is perhaps the most famous river in Japan for producing stones. This one has just amazing texture associated with it. It's on a daisa, a wooden base, and again, just has incredible presence. Here's another Kamagawa stone that was also displayed at the Suiseki Association in 2016. In this case, the table also captures your attention. It's a very ornate table, really nice work. The stone itself is a landscape but it's not just a simple little mountain stone, right? There's a lot going on in that stone. Think of that as a mountain pass, or think of that as, yeah, someplace you're going to climb through because you got to get between those two peaks. Just a really impressive stone. There are Dowa stones. Dowa literally means like a plain stones or plateau stones, but for us here in Colorado, we should think of Dowa stones as where the mountains meet the plains. So the idea here is you've got a near mountain, you've got a large plain coming up to this near mountain, but in the far distance, you see another mountain. So maybe you're driving by Long's Peak, but looking south, you can also see Pikes Peak far on the horizon. That's the sort of idea or imagery that should come to mind when you're thinking about Dowa stones. Again, if you just look at that for a few minutes and think about seeing a mountain far away, I think it's very visually powerful. This is a Seigaku stone that I saw in Kobayashi's gardens. It's a limestone, comes from around the Abe River, and these tend to be highly textured. This is a Mako stone from the Japanese Suiseki exhibition in 2018. It's another type of limestone, although it tends to be banded. So usually you can tell the difference between the Seigaku stones and the Mako stones, even they're both limestone. And there's also the Furuya stone. That's a type of limestone. These are probably the best known type of limestone Suiseki in Japan. And this one was actually for sale on eBay. I did not buy it, but I was really impressed by the base of the stone because the craftsmanship, even on the bottom where you can't see it, is really amazing. And you do see just really high quality craftsmanship on the wooden bases under these stones. While I was at Taikon 10, I was able to attend another Suiseki exhibition at a nearby temple. And when you see viewing stones in temples, when I have seen them in temples, they've always been on the floor or at floor level. And so you can see that's actually me sitting there looking at the stones. But here's another example of someone at an exhibition in a temple, and they are looking at the stones and reading about them. This was at the Heian Iseki Kai show. Kai means club. So this is a club that holds its stone show at the Chionji Temple. And again, this was during Taikon 10, but it was really off the beaten path. We didn't see anyone else there from Taikon 10. I knew about it because of my association with Hiromi Nakaoji and Tom Elias, who were also attending Taikon 10. And if you look here in the blue shirt is Tom, and her face is half hidden, but that's his wife, Hiromi. And they're talking to a Daiza carver who carved many of the Daizas associated with this club. This is another Sajikawa stone. It's a tiger stone or a Tora Ishii stone. And just interesting shape. These tiger stones are very prized in Japan. Here's another stone. I didn't capture a label on this one, but I'm going to guess that it's either probably a Kamagawa, but it could be a Sajikawa stone. But again, here it's shown in a suiban with sand and represents either a mountain or an island. In this case, it could represent an island. And these were just two guys that were associated with the Suiseki show. They were setting out in the sun just outside the temple where the show was, and there was a Zen garden out there, and they were just hanging out talking. So I just thought that was a nice image to capture, and you can see the gate associated with the Zen garden across from them. So back to Taikon 10. When you leave the main show, you go into the second half of the convention center, which is the sales area. And one of the great things about Taikon 10 is you can go look at the trees for an hour, go hang out in the sales area. There's tables, there's chairs, everybody's back there. If there's somebody involved in bonsai in Japan, you're probably going to run into them. I ran into Bill Valvanis probably 3 times and other people that I had met before at some of these shows. So you're just going to hang out and run into people. There are hundreds of stones, hundreds of bonsai, hundreds of pots for sale, and they do bargain. The stone right here in the middle, I was initially interested in buying, and the price dropped by 30% over 10 minutes of talking to the guy. Also, here's a tree for 18 million yen. If you need me to translate, that's going to be about $170,000. And that doesn't even include this Suiseki right here at the bottom, which you can see is a mountain stone. That is a white pine. So everything is for sale, just almost anything you could possibly dream of. Scrolls, pots, everything. Here's a stone that was in the show, but also was for sale. And the back line, or the very back of the show, Moramai had many trees and stones on display, but also on sale. Now, looking at this, I would have guessed at first, well, I won't say what I thought it was, but I was wrong. I look at this and I start to say, oh, okay, I'm wrong. And oh, by the way, this is about $1,700 for this stone with its box. The box adds historical context, so that actually is quite important with this stone. But as I look at a little further, I start to see, oh, this is actually the type of stone, which is the first 2 characters. And yes, this and this are the same kanji. You get a little bit better at reading handwritten kanji after you've seen a few. And by the way, I cannot read kanji, but I can read enough to identify stones at this point. Excuse me. So now I've got enough information. I know that this is a Yazi stone. So this actually came from the Kyoto area. So we're going to talk a little bit about kanji, just because if you are interested in stones, you should at least learn enough kanji to identify the basic types of stones in Japan. And here I've just thrown a bunch of kanji at you. The first is Yama for mountain. This is Tora for tiger. This is Naka for John Naka. This is Dori Street. This is actually Nagano, where I lived, and it's important to know this because you got to keep your train tickets straight. This is Gucci for mouth. This is Ta again for Setagawa, and this is Gawa for river. I'm gonna, those two. Let's put them together. That's Yamadori. So you actually see that all over the place, or at least the Dori part of it, because and it shows up with this extra, I think it's katakana symbol often when it's used as street, but this is the word for street. So Yamadori literally just means mountain road or mountain street. Here are some of the most common types of stones. The first one is the Kamagawa. The second one, there's our rice paddy, so that's the Setagawa. This is Tadamigawa. This one is Sajikawa, and this is Ibigawa. And in case you need a cheater, here you go. So I would say if you're interested in Japanese stones, you probably need to know at least this much kanji so that you know what you're looking at. And it's helpful if you know a few more. Here I've got Furuya, Hakaizan, Yaze. This is the Abe River, and this is the Narai River. So again, here is a Setagawa stone. Again, it's a tiger stone, but it's a different color tiger stone. It's not the white tiger stone. And that's just, again, has a classic mountain form, foothills here, maybe another hill here, just really nice stone. Here's a stone that is a Tadami stone that followed me home in 2018. So that was actually on a previous trip to Japan. The base was carved by a well-known base carver in Japan. And again, it has a mountain form, but lots of texture to it. Here's another stone that I picked up on this trip. this stone is actually a Kamagawa, according to, which is written up here at the top. And what was wonderful about this stone was I actually got it from one of the members of the club that I attended at the temple. He was selling some of his stones and was happy to do that. Probably got it for a fourth of what it would have cost from a dealer. Kamo, since this is a Kamagawa stone, also means duck. And so this kanji is actually quite useful if you want to order your lunch, a soba noodle bowl with duck. So you actually see kamo showing up on the menu of restaurants. And when you see kamo showing up on the menus of restaurants, you know you're going to get duck. Okay, I just want to show you, to close, two castles. This is the Black Castle of Matsumoto, and this was just an hour train ride south of where I was living. And it's one of the two best preserved castles in Japan that is original. The other, oh, and by the way, I found a stone in Matsumoto in an antique shop that again was really cheap. The other castle that is original and very well known is the White Castle of Himeji, and this is actually near Kobe in southern Japan. And so these are known as the White Castle and the Black Castle, the two best preserved original castles in Japan. So I hope you enjoyed seeing Taikon 10 and learning a little bit more about Suiseki. Thank you.